We are here with another episode of Address It. I'm sitting here with Laurelle Myhra. That's it, right? Laurelle Myhra. She's running for school board. School board at large, or?
So it's District 5.
Okay.
So that's Longfellow area and kind of south of Powderhorn.
Okay. Well, I got to get in your business. We want to learn. We want to figure you out. Tell me a little bit about you. Where you from? How'd you get into this?
Yeah, so I live in South Minneapolis. I've lived in South Minneapolis for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I was living in Stillwater for over 10 years. And when I had the opportunity to move to the area, I was excited to. I've worked in Minneapolis pretty much my entire adult life. I am originally from Red Lake. That's my tribe. And just really love the Minneapolis area, and having children of my own really had me thinking about what I could do to make a bigger impact in some of the issues that I was seeing at the schools.
But what was the moment, though? I feel like it's always a moment when people like, man, I'm going to run. Like, I'm sick of this. Or what was that moment for you, if it was?
Yeah, I think there was a lot kind of going on through, the teachers' strike. I definitely agreed with the need for better pay, but just the disruption and the impact that it had on children who were probably most negatively impacted were probably the children with special needs, and my daughter has been recently diagnosed with some learning disabilities. So I definitely saw the impact of COVID and all the times that the schools were shut down, and a lot of the backlash and uprising that happened with the George Floyd murder as well was impacting the community, and a lot of the children that suffered were definitely the children of color and Indigenous children. So we felt it the hardest, I think.
So when you say suffer, what do you mean by suffering, though, as far as in education?
Well, there was a lot of questions about like why, for me, the education gap was really what I noticed. It's not just children who are in special education, not that my daughter's in special education, but has some special needs, and also the children who are learning English language and who are suffering from racial trauma. That those are the areas that really were already suffering and really had kind of odds against them. And then for all of these different challenges to come their way, I think really made it even harder for them to learn.
So, I mean, as far as like policies or anything like that, what do you feel like is not working and needs to be addressed like immediately?
Well, so there have been some policy changes recently to try to address like the significant shortage of teachers of color and Indigenous teachers.
Yeah.
And really that change only impacts when they're retaining teachers of color. So right now there's such a huge gap in where we need to be. There needs to be some policy change around recruitment, I believe, to bring teachers of color and Indigenous teachers into the district.
Why do you think it's important, though, to have, I guess for the teachers to look like the students, though? Why is that? Why can't they just learn from curriculum?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of data out there and research out there that's been done that shows that when there's a cultural match or there's a racial match with teachers and students, that children learn better, that there's less behavioral referrals, there's better attendance, and children graduate at higher rates. So it really, if we're looking to address the education gap, we really need to address hiring more teachers of color and Indigenous teachers.
Are there a lot of people applying? Is it a shortage in those type of teachers, you think, or?
Well, there is a shortage of teachers. But I think historically there's been policies or biases in hiring that have impacted the fact that more teachers, white teachers, are getting into school at higher rates. So there's some data out there that shows that Indigenous students and African American students and students of color are not taking advanced courses at the same rates that white children are, for example, or they're not ready for college at the same rates. So if you have this huge disparity in who's going to college and who's being successful in college because of these educational gaps, it's going to affect the hiring too of teachers who are coming down the line.
So what's some of the biggest issues you're focusing on? Like,
So that's definitely one of them. Teachers of color, Indigenous teachers is a big area. The educational gap is another. I'm also very interested in children's mental health. So my background is in marriage and family therapy. I have a master's degree and a doctorate in marriage and family therapy. And a lot of what I focus on is not just children's well-being, but the family's well-being. So intergenerational impact of whether it be trauma, historical trauma, and then racial trauma and what that does to children, and how children can learn when they're dealing with mental health issues. So that's another area that I really want to address. It's just gotten, like I mentioned earlier, there's been a number of really painful experiences that have happened that continue to impact the community.
what's your thoughts on public safety? There's been a lot of, I guess, school violence, maybe weapons and stuff coming up in schools. But then there's also a side that says we don't need law enforcement presence in school. Well, I just want to know your thoughts surrounding
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think I've seen a positive shift since there haven't been police in the schools. I feel like, from what I'm hearing from Native American families, anyways, that there's a more of a sense of safety. I know that's not everybody's feeling and that's not everybody's perspective, but when you are come from a group that has historically been maybe traumatized or targeted, that is the sense that you have. There is going to be that fear. So, what other strategies can there be? And I think, looking at some of the root of the problem, which is racial bias, how can we have racial equity in education? And I think it really is looking at having more teachers of color and Indigenous teachers so that there are less people are feeling like behaviors are dealt with in a healthier way, and children are feeling respected and treated well in the classroom so that they're not being sent out of the classroom and with a list of problems, basically, to the point where they're being involved with, I guess, security and things like that. So my thought is that, or hope is that there would be more of a restorative justice approach to if there are troubles and problems with specific children, that there's a way to help them learn from what's happened and be welcomed back into the community in some way.
So what about like metal detectors or like I forget the different kind of doors, more secure doors, where you got to be buzzed in. What do you, anything like that?
Um, well, so I don't know what all schools have that. So I'm going to be honest, and just say that I don't know.
Do you feel like they need that though? Is what I'm
I
saying?
don't believe that they do
Okay.
because, like, I have gone to, for example, South High has a bad reputation for having a lot of violence. But I've gone to the school probably a good 8 to 10 times in the last couple of years while I've served on the Indigenous excuse me, American Indian Parent Advisory Council. I've gone up to the school for a number of different events, and the the building itself was, my understanding is that the architecture was, his history or experience was building prisons. So if you go into the school, there's not a lot of light in the schools, and there's not a lot of, it's not a welcoming, thriving environment feel for a school compared to some of the other schools that I've visited. Not necessarily in Minneapolis public schools, but in Matamidi, for example, or Stillwater. It just has a different vibe and different feel to it. But I guess my thought is, I'm thinking about it, I think South does have something along the lines, but the kids, are there to learn. They're not there to be judged or searched. And I believe that if we can make a positive impact in children's lives, that they don't, and create a safe environment, that maybe that they don't feel like they need to bring weapons to school. And I don't know the data on that, so I can't really say, but I wasn't hearing that as an issue in my time as being a parent advisory council member, or the vice chair of the council.
I see you spoke on holding the administration, staff, teachers accountable, for racial equity and personal biases, right? So what does that look like, though? I'm curious to know, what does that look like? Or what do you suggest
Yeah.
to do that?
Yeah, well, so I have some experience in history with a couple different things that I think could be helpful. One of which is working specifically with the teachers and administration on racial equity. So embedding a racial equity lens into each of the schools and into the district, so that everybody is looking at all of the issues that we come across on a day-to-day basis from a racial equity lens. So that's one issue, and then going through policies in that way as well. And then the other thing would be more training. So I've been a part of developing racial equity and training curriculum for medical providers who are dealing with Native American families and patients who we know that there's a huge health disparity as well as education disparity out there. So some of my thought is training, but we know that training alone isn't always successful. So maybe doing some mentoring and some additional evaluation of how teachers are doing. So, for example, whether it's a part of their annual evaluations that they have, that it's built in there, that racial equity and where are people at in their own journey of working towards being less biased.
It seems tough, though. It's tough to, decrease personal biases. Like that's, people grow up like that. People, it's embedded in them almost.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
that's an uphill battle, let's just say.
Yes.
I want to talk about gender-neutral bathrooms in schools.
Okay.
What's your position on that? Is that, let me ask, is that okay is that is there a certain age limit for that or age group when that should be exposed to them? What's your thoughts on that?
Um, well, if they're single stall, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, just the whole transgender, the whole
Oh,
mix of mixing that into education.
I think that people deserve to feel safe in their environments, and we know that there's been a history of bullying and painful experiences for transgender people. So I think just from what I've read in my experience, if people want individual stalls to feel comfortable, I think that that's there's many other reasons to have them as well. And
So I guess I'm saying, what do you think the setup should be? Should it be a setup where it's like gender neutral, or should it be all mixed in, to whatever they identify as?
well, I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't want people to feel like targeted. So if people are gonna feel more comfortable having their own designated bathroom, I think that that's fine. But I also feel like people should be able to use the bathroom that they feel aligns best with their gender. Um, does that answer your question?
A little, I mean,
Okay.
what about in sports? Transgender in sports? Do you think? I guess is it fair? Is it any advantages?
Um, I don't have strong feelings about or thoughts about it. I think my main concern would just be that there's not any discrimination happening towards people if they are feeling, you know, if they want to play, for example, in, with their gender, what aligns with their gender identity, and that's being challenged. I would support people being able to play and support in the support team that best aligns with what they identify with. I don't want people to feel targeted because of their gender identity.
So, what about school curriculum? Do you think that should be changed? Do you think what's your position on what we're learning or what the kids are learning?
I think that that's an excellent question. I think that a lot of the education that's out there. I mean, I think we need to do better when it comes to our reading and math. We know that our reading and math scores are really low, not just with
Compared to
compare in the state. I'll just take our state for example.
so in Minneapolis, our scores are low
Our scores are
compared to the
low.
rest of the state.
Our scores are low at certain schools in Minneapolis compared to like Matamidi, for example. The scores there are much higher, double than some of the schools in the Minneapolis area. So, and then when you look at that data even closer, you look at there's huge racial disparities where children are reading at half of that of, so children of color are reading at half of that of the white students, for example, proficiency wise. In math, I think it's 1/5. So there's a need for more support there for students to get up to where they need to be. Some of it's probably curriculum. We could probably do better there and what's made available to students. But I also think there's an issue of not enough education out there that is, shows appropriate history, for example, for Indigenous and African American history is not really in the schools the way that I think it should be. Access to reading materials that are specific to the groups, libraries could do better. So I think that there's a lot that can be done. in the area of curriculum.
What about like stuff to prepare you for life? More more stuff surrounding that.
I think that that could be, that's something that is definitely something that I'm very interested in, because I think there's a lot of companies out there in Minnesota that would probably love to have training programs or have some step-up programs to help prepare students to come, because we have a workforce shortage in a lot of different areas, including teachers. There is a teacher program that helps prepare children to become teachers, but we could do that with mental health. There's a huge shortage of medical providers, nurses. So really looking at the different fields and the different companies that we have, like 3M and Medtronic. There's all these companies out there that probably would love to partner with Minneapolis Public Schools and help to mentor students and bring them into the workforce.
So I think you talked about it a little bit, but the policy for well, I'm trying to figure out the words. The policy for colored teachers of color, the new rule. How do you feel about that? Was that a win or was that a?
I wouldn't say it was a win. I think it was a positive. I think that it was a move in the right direction.
Can you explain it a little bit? Just like
Yeah, so what it was is there's been, the teachers union has had what people refer to as like seniority. So those who've been there the longest in the system are historically white. So whenever layoffs would happen, it would be all the new people, which would be those who are teachers of color and indigenous teachers, rather than based on like who's performing the best or who is, you know, making up for some of that history of bias in education and bias in hiring and lack of teachers. So I guess my thought on that is that it's a positive. What they're doing is they're getting rid of that seniority.
So now it's reversed, right?
Yeah. So now they can keep, yes. So now they're going to keep all teachers of color and indigenous teachers. So, I mean, I think it's a positive because that needs to happen. But I do think it fails to look at, you know, still fails to look at like the quality of the teachers, which, you know, I think we have a lot of quality teachers there, but then anybody kind of stays in long term too. So I think it's a good thing, but I think it's not enough. I think that there needs to be more done to recruit and get teachers of color and indigenous teachers in.
Yeah, but I mean, but if you get them, and then if that wasn't in place, then they would just lose their jobs first, right?
True. Retaining is another thing too, because yeah, when it comes to layoffs and things, they could lose them that way. But there's also a history in Minneapolis Public Schools that I've heard about that is teachers not necessarily feeling treated well or experiencing bias against their white colleagues or from their white colleagues, if that makes sense. So there's stress that people feel in their day-to-day lives that can definitely impact whether or not they feel like they can stay and continue to teach.
I think you touched on it a little bit, but what does being culturally responsive look like?
So culturally responsive is having the right reading materials, having education that
You said the right reading materials?
yeah, so having reading materials that represents BIPOC people. So, making sure that the classes have lots of reading materials that represents. It means doing more than just celebrating one day a year, a specific culture group, or one month a year. It's really embedding the education and the curriculum throughout the year, so that that children really come to understand BIPOC history in Minnesota.
I see you mentioned systematic issues that plague our schools and maintain racial disparities. I just want you to talk a little bit about that, a little more about that.
Systemic issues. So we've talked a lot about the systemic issues around hiring and how that's impacted. So that's one of the big ones that come to mind for me when I'm thinking about systemic issues is just the way in which hiring has taken place over the years, and the situation that we're in now. Systemic issues of what the children are being taught and how the children are being treated. A lot of times people think that bias and that racism really is an unintentional bias. But when we have the scores that we do, and we have proof that we do of such huge gaps in education, to me that just proves that there's a racist system here at play that's maintaining the status quo of of BIPOC children being set up for failure.
COVID, how did that? How do you feel it affected, and how much has it affected students? And let's talk about the uphill battle of getting them back on track.
Well, the schools in Minneapolis were closed a lot. And when you look at other districts outside of the Minneapolis area, there were lower cases of COVID. So we had high cases of COVID, a lot of closures because of COVID. So I think, a lot of the challenges and things that children are facing are getting blamed on COVID. But I think that we have, now that the rates are down and children are back in school, I think it's just exacerbating what those gaps that we already had in place, or that were already, there. So I think it's just, you're right, it's an uphill battle to get children the support that they need to get to where we need them to be successful.
So you mentioned that you have a doctor back, So is that what you went to school for? And did you go to school for education?
I didn't. However, I've done a lot of teaching myself. So a lot of my experience in teaching has been with master's degree students. I have taught some undergrad, but a lot of, I recently developed a racial trauma course for university that'll be teaching online this December for the first time. Just because there is a huge need in the school system at that level as well. Like teaching, you probably wouldn't be surprised, just the number of college students that just don't understand basics of history and also how racism, it does impact different systems. So that's a lot of what I taught a multicultural therapy course maybe it was a year ago now, but a lot of the young adults in the course really struggled with, believing or understanding what I see as structural racism, and I think it's because the school systems do a poor job of explaining and addressing it with children and helping children advocate for themselves and advocating for students.
So what's the actual like responsibilities of the school board, but also just a school board member? You know.
Yeah, so the school board is responsible for hiring and kind of overseeing the superintendent's work. So the superintendent reports to the board, and so that would be a big part of it. And then also the finances, so overseeing the budget. So approving the budget for the year. And I see that as really a central role where we actually have a lot of power to be able to make sure that dollars go into things that are actually going to make a difference and actually support the causes that are maybe forgotten a lot of times.
So you say things that'll make a difference. What, like what?
So, so like I mentioned before, the special education department or program is really underfunded. English language learners are really underfunded. They take, but our schools in general are underfunded. There's some advocacy that needs to happen with the state to bring in some additional dollars to support those things, but also to be able to make sure our schools are functioning well and that they have the money that they need for to make sure that there's supports for reading and math to get children up to their reading level and right.
But a lot of times they say like, I don't know, certain schools, they don't like there's funding, but there's certain schools get skipped on the funding process. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why is that? What contributes to that? Like everybody
Yeah.
doesn't get the same amount, or what's the process with that? Do you know?
So it's by student, and some students get more money than other students. So if you have low enrollment, for example, then your school might not be funded to run at the way it typically does or the way that they had planned for it to be. So that's a big part. And when schools are not functioning well, then that's when you start to see students leaving the district. And there was some data too that African American students were leaving the district at much higher rates than other students.
Leaving the district? Okay.
Yeah, so probably going to charter schools or private schools or going out of Minneapolis for school.
So I mean, what do we do? Like, what solutions for that stuff though? How do we get kids to stay, I guess, stay home or stay in their areas?
Well, I think that we need to do a big push once we get a new group of people on the board. I'm hoping that we'll get people like-minded on the board to myself, and that we are able to set an agenda that really can push the boundaries of what's been happening and start to start some of these initiatives of racial equity so that we can get the word out to students who maybe have left the district, who have not felt cared about or their interests made a priority, so that we can recruit them back, essentially, I think is what's going to need to happen. But I think there's also students out there who may not have ever come to Minneapolis Public Schools who are in Minneapolis that if we can do things good and start to improve the reputation of Minneapolis Public Schools because of the racial equity work we're doing, I think we could recruit additional students as well. But I definitely know that that's not the only way to fill the gap financially, that the gap is much larger than that too, financially.
But you say recruiting though, like, what is that? I mean, what does that look like though? What is recruiting?
Yeah. So as a parent myself, when I was out looking at schools and things, it was a real challenge. And there are a little bit more resources out there now than there was in the past, but I think we can still do even better so for example, there's an organization called Great Schools Minnesota. Have you heard of them before?
I think I have.
Okay. They've come out with this really nice booklet of all the different schools, and it kind of rates them and has some information about what makes each of the schools unique. I feel like we can even do more than that and really highlight some of the school's strengths and maybe make an online tool to help parents really dig in and put in, maybe look at, okay, my student likes art, or my student likes this sport. What school is going to be best suited to my student? But I know there's also the challenge of the different boundaries and things put into place about where kids can go and things like that. So that's definitely something that I have in mind of something that I don't think was a helpful change to make.
The boundaries being? So how was it before that? It was just no boundaries or just like a...
Well, there were boundaries, but they shifted them and made it harder for people to bus from different areas. So now you can only bus in a small area to your school.
You don't get a bus if you, what is it, within a mile or two or something like that?
Well, if you're out of the, so I think that there's something with how close you are, but then also how far you are. So if you are outside of the community school boundary, then you don't get a bus, even if that's the school that best aligns with your students' needs. So I think that and I think some parents probably would pay for a bus if, I just think there's so many different creative things to look at for funding that we haven't, that aren't being talked about.
So the school board how does that make up, look, is it, how many people?
So there's 6 people on the board.
Okay.
And it's, there's 2, let's see here. I think 1 student on the board as well. So I think that might make it 7 with the student.
7 total? Okay. And then it's just voting processes and...
Yep. So so some of the positions that are open, there's 6 positions. Oh, wait, is that right? Is there 6? I feel like there's a couple positions that are remaining, but there's some folks who are running right now who don't have an opponent. There's a couple positions that don't have an opponent. So those will be new positions coming in. And then there's 2 at-large seats. And then District 5, I have an opponent in my race.
So did you decide, like, I'm not going to do it large, or?
Because I had a seat open in my district, so there was somebody who relinquished their seat in my district this last go around. So it was open. So it made more sense for me to run in my district than it would for the at-large. The at-large positions they are a lot harder to get. It's the whole city as opposed to mine is a bigger district, but still it's a smaller portion of the community.
And you said that's the Longfellow area,
Yep.
South Minneapolis.
Yep. So it's from Lake Street all the way to 62, and along the Mississippi River, and then all the way over to 35W around. But I think the cutoff there is between, I think it's like 37th Street is the cutoff by Powderhorn.
So you running against one other person.
Yep.
What makes you the best candidate?
Well, I feel like, well, I have young children, and I, am more active right now currently in the school system. My opponent is a retired school teacher, and I feel like has a really specific kind of view of what's going on in the school system, whereas I have more of a parent view and have more of a background in racial equity and also a director background. I've been a director for 7 years, and then but total probably 14 years of management and directorship experience. So I feel like I can bring that experience and really make a difference.
Okay. Tell us one interesting thing about you that most people don't know.
Oh, well, I just ran and so it's a triathlon that I just did this past week. It's called Quay Strong. And a friend of mine, Lisa Shefty, who's also running for school board, is the founder of this triathlon. And it's for Indigenous women, and it's run and biking and canoeing instead of swimming. So it's definitely very challenging, and it definitely took a day of just
How
rest.
long was it?
So, well, it's at your own pace. You can do as hard as you want. So you canoe across Made-Makaska, back and forth, and then you do 3 laps of around with biking, and then you can do 1 or 2 laps of running around Made-Makaska. So it's kind of at your own level, and you can adjust it to what you want it to be. But it's a nice challenge. So that's something I've been doing for a good 9 years now. And
Oh, okay.
So this
every
was,
year.
Yes.
You do it every year.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is the first year that I was actually not going to do it.
Why not?
Because I was Open Streets Minnehaha was the same day, and I really wanted to get out there and get flyers out and things, and so I had to do a trade-off and do this for my mental health and my physical health. But then I ended up getting sick too.
But that's important though. Your mental
Yeah.
health though.
Yeah.
That's important. You can't lead if your mental health ain't right.
Yeah.
Hi, I appreciate you. I mean, if you could just say something to the people, what would you tell them?
Well, I definitely feel like this is a good time for me to come on, seeing as there's other candidates who are like-minded and who can really lead in the area of racial equity. I feel like it's never been a better time, I think, than now with all these positions open, and there are such great candidates. I think Sonia, I would mention, and Lisa are the 2 at-large candidates who I endorse, because I think that they also have a very like-minded agenda. So I just hope people get out and vote, and I hope that I have votes, that people will hear this and understand my heart.
So when is voting?
November 8th is the election day. However, people can vote ahead of time in person, or they can order a ballot as well through the mail.
Where can we find you if we want to get in touch?
So my website is Laurelle Myhra for schoolboard.com. Or people can find me on Facebook at Laurelle Myhra 4, instead of the number 4, it's spelled out school board.
Are you responsive though? A lot of political people aren't necessarily responsive, you know.
Oh yeah,
Or you reach out.
Well, I should say I did have a snafu with my website email, but I have been responding to people. I have tons of yard signs, so if people want yard signs, I can deliver those. If people go on my website and email me their address, I can drop those off. I have been getting out and door knocking, so I hope to meet people, and am happy to do phone calls if people want to drop me a message and have a call and ask me more questions. I'm happy to do that as well.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Good luck.
All right. Thank you so much.